As a teenager, I was really awkward. I'd get mad at my parents whenever they denied me a sleepover. And of course, I was mortified whenever I'd break out in pimples. This is what I worried about when I was a teen. You see, I won the birth lottery. I was born in New York and was saved from the traumatic experience of migrating to the United States. My dad, on the other hand, rode in the trunk of a car. My mom crossed the Rio Grande along with other migrant women. My sister, a baby at the time, was left behind in Guatemala, but was eventually brought over once my parents gained residency. As a US citizen, I had so many opportunities available to me. I got to study whatever I wanted to in college. That ended up being design and media. I'd later find out that the immigration system definitely needed a redesign. Knowing what my family had been through, I wanted to give back to my community. So I ended up working at Americans for Immigrant Justice in my 20s as a paralegal. In this role, I spent hundreds of hours speaking with unaccompanied immigrant youth from Latin America, mainly from Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador. I'd pry into these kids' lives. I'd ask them uncomfortable questions in the most sensitive way possible. Questions like, who did you live with back home? Has anyone ever hurt you? What was your journey like to the United States? And they'd answer. These kids are referred to as unaccompanied immigrant children. They're unaccompanied because they're picked up at the border by La Migra, or the Border Patrol. Perhaps they're with other adults, but not their parents. They're from countries where the civil wars have morphed into new forms of violence. These are places where the government is corrupt, gangs rule with fear, places where femicide occurs with impunity. So you're 14, and one of the deadliest gangs in the world demands that you join them or you die. What are your options? You can't go to the police, so do you stay and die, or do you at least try to escape? And escaping is a long road. The struggle continues as migrants travel the hundreds of miles it takes to cross Mexico. Many brave riding atop La Bestia, or the beast. That's what people call the freight trains that migrants ride atop, where many risk losing their limbs or die. It's in Mexico where they become the most vulnerable to those seeking to exploit them. It's where women face the harsh reality of being raped as collateral payment for their journey. And if you manage to make it to the US border, then you're vulnerable and exposed to the Sonoran Desert. A lot of people wonder, why are these kids so willing to risk their lives? And the answer is often simply because the risk of dying is much higher, if not certain, if they stay in their home country. So after a kid is picked up near the border, she's then sent to a government shelter. That's where legal NGOs send their attorneys and their paralegals to conduct interviews with these kids and inform them. The goal is to inform them about their rights as detained immigrants. But here's the problem. The United States government does not provide legal representation for these kids in a court. So that means even if you're 11 years old, you don't have an attorney, you could go before a judge and have to speak on your own behalf. So I ask you, is this justice? Is this really due process if a child is expected to defend their own life in front of a judge? What must this be like for a kid? Imagine yourself in another country, everyone around you speaking another language, and you know you're expecting to go in front of a judge and have to defend something, whatever that means. I've been in those courtrooms with these kids. I felt their nervous energy. And even with an interpreter explaining everything that's going on, legal terminology is still confusing and formal. There's always a fear that you can make a mistake, and that one little mistake can change the course of your case and your life. This is why it's so important for each kid to have legal representation. Feel prepared and have someone on their side. But almost half of unaccompanied immigrant children don't have lawyers. And according to Syracuse University's Track Immigration Project, kids without lawyers have an 88% chance of being deported. This is a death sentence. A year ago, I decided to combine my firsthand knowledge of working with these kids and my graduate work in design. And I knew there had to be a way to better communicate legal concepts to these kids. So I started working on this project called Juntos. And it takes a visual and sometimes humorous approach. They're short, information-packed Spanish language videos that help kids while they're waiting to see a judge. Unaccompanied youth are like any American kid. They want to feel safe. And they listen to the latest music, they have crushes, they worry about their pimples, right? But they've been challenged with this overwhelming expectation of navigating the immigration system on their own. We can do better than this. These kids deserve better access to information about immigration court. This won't solve everything, but it's a step in the right direction. It's a step in designing for justice, in designing for equity. It might even save lives. Thank you.